So I make no apologies for the fact that I like a weed-free allotment plot and I like a weed-free garden as well. And I make a distinction between the two because it takes about 10 times as long to keep a weed-free allotment as it does a weed-free garden. Allotments are just terrible for weeds. I mean, there's all the perennial weeds, you know, the mare's tail, the bindweed, you know, the clover everywhere. You know, it's just, it's a real problem. Couch grass, of course. Dealing with those types of weeds, it's almost a generational problem. You know, it's a generational challenge. You know, I probably will spend at least 10 years trying to get on top of those weeds, and I'll probably still have them because they just come in from the neighbouring plots. There's nothing much I can do about it. And then I've got the problem, of course, of weeds blowing into the allotment plot, and they blow in from surrounding plots where the weeds are just left to go to seed, and they blow in from the green drive that runs alongside of my plot, you know, which is the access route effectively to all the plots in the centre of the allotment. And often that grass just doesn't get cut enough, and so there's loads and loads of dandelions and clover and things like that going to seed on there. So while my temperament is such that I really like everything to be weed free, I just have to be practical, and it's just not possible for everything to be completely perfect. So I've adopted several approaches to this. One is just mentally. I just say to myself that I'm going to only weed twice. I'm going to weed when I'm harvesting, and if a weed sort of catches my eye, I'll just pull it out during the harvest. But I won't do that too seriously. You know, I'll only do that for the more serious ones that are perhaps on the verge of going to seed that I just missed somewhere. And the other thing is I'll weed once a month, and I'll do a thorough job, and I'll go through every single bed, and I'll take out every single weed, and I'll clear the paths. And you know, if there's any weeds around the outside of the plot, I'll trim those. I'll just get the plot looking pretty good that one time a month, and that's often just before I do the tour. And so people think, wow, that plot is absolutely weed free. Well, unfortunately no, it's weed free once a month. And of course I just accept the fact that I'm going to have a lot of mare's tail and bindweed in particular on the plot. I just have to accept that. There's nothing I can do about it. The other thing I do is that when I'm doing bed prep, I'm again really meticulous to remove every weed that I can. And then I'm also meticulous in terms of trying to make sure that I lay down a compost mulch at least once a year. And ideally that compost mulch would be weed free, which means I have to be quite careful about either buying weed-free compost, and by far the best I think is mushroom compost, which is generally sterilised, steam sterilised prior to being delivered to consumers. I can't get mushroom compost anymore, so I'm using my own homemade compost on the surface of beds, which I don't in fact normally do. And that means I was preparing for this for a while, so I have been trying to get my homemade compost as weed free as possible, which means don't put things in that have got a lot of weed seeds. And for me, the best examples of that are things like golden purslane, which just has incredible numbers of seeds at the time when you're composting its leaves, and New Zealand spinach, again horrendous, grass seed, grass cuttings, absolutely full of seeds, especially if you use a mower that kind of, you know, one of those hover mowers that sucks up the grass cuttings into the bag. It's sucking up all those weed seeds that are dropped on the soil as well as all those grass cuttings. It's just the worst. Grass cuttings are just the worst at this time of year. And in summer, in spring they're fine, there's not very many weed seeds in grass at that time, so it's quite a good mulch for spring going into summer. But at this time of year and during summer, no, I wouldn't go anywhere near it. To put ripe tomatoes, for example, in the compost mix, they're, you know, I'd rather eat them. They're a terrible one for weed seeds. So you just have to be careful, basically. Just don't put a lot of weed seeds in your compost unless you can reliably heat it to about 60 degrees, the whole bin. You know, I mean, the problem is I can heat the middle of the bin, you know, no problem, to 60 degrees, but I can't get the outer edges of it. And even if I turn it, the chances of getting every bit of those outer edges into the centre each time I turn it, sort of thing. It's just impossible. So try not to put too many weedy things in the compost, at least that's what I do. The next thing is I just don't disturb the soil. I know that the soil is full of weed seeds. You know, they've blown in, whatever. And every time you disturb the soil, you're kind of bringing those seeds to the surface. And so I don't pull the roots of the plants out, for example. I don't dig big holes. I just use a dibber just to press the soil in. And, you know, I just generally try to have a soil that's completely undisturbed with a layer of sterile mulch on top of that. And just accept that there are weeds going to come up from the bottom, but try and minimise the number that germinate on the top. Now, right now I'm trying Strulch, and I've said several videos so far, I'm not recommending it, certainly at this point. I think it's too expensive, but I'm giving it a go. So I just had to dash away then because we had a compost delivery, actually a well-rotted horse manure delivery from KC Compost. And that's the company I used to get my mushroom compost from, but they don't supply it anymore. And so I'm down to horse manure. And horse manure is not a fantastic mulch from the perspective of being free of weed seeds. Unless it's really well composted, there's still going to be a few in there, but it's better than nothing. And we put that on pretty quick, pretty deep rather. So probably about 2 inches, but probably every couple of years because it's quite expensive. And although we value our time pretty highly and we don't like weeding very much, you know, I can't afford to do it every year. So yeah, so we just put that on Debbie's plot, and you can see a little clip there of all of the bags ready to be spread out on the plot. So it's looking pretty good. So there we go, that's the basic strategy. Just be pragmatic, don't take it all too seriously, don't disturb the soil, put on a nice compost mulch, trying to make sure your compost is as weed free as possible, and live with it. You know, do those basic things, and it works okay. Grow a lot of food, and it's just a lot easier as well to try and keep it reasonably weed free. Life is a lot simpler when you're on top of things and you don't let them get out of control, you don't get demoralized and all of that sort of thing. So yeah, that is the approach that I take. See you soon.